a powerful, majestic creature following in the footsteps, metaphorically speaking, of ancestors from thousands of years ago. The bison returns home.
This forest looked perfectly healthy. Tall trees, thick canopy, green in every direction. Conservationists had spent decades and millions of pounds trying to save it. None of it worked. Then someone made a decision that sounded almost absurd.
She went out first, made sure it was safe for them, indicated to them, and they followed her out and then posed for a bit for the cameras and then just headed out their new world where they're going to be spend the rest of their lives, hopefully.
They released 4 bison into the woodland, stepped back, and watched what happened. What those 4 animals did with nothing but bark and hooves rewrote everything scientists thought they knew about saving a dying forest. The day the forest remembered. On the 6th of November 2025, rangers at West Blean and Thorndon Woods in Kent made a discovery that stopped everything. The matriarch of Britain's only wild bison herd was dead. She was 21 years old. She had no official name because this project never gave her one. She was simply called the matriarch, and that title carried more weight than any name ever could. Donovan Wright, one of the 2 rangers hired specifically to watch over this herd, had spent 3 years learning her every movement. He knew which trees she preferred to rub against. He knew when she was about to charge through a thicket and when she was simply scanning the tree line. When he found her, he wrote something that has stayed with everyone who followed this project. He said she was the rock, the foundation of the herd, and the cornerstone of bison rewilding in the United Kingdom. He said when she led, they settled. When she paused, they listened. She had not arrived in this forest as some beloved creature raised from a calf and cherished by rangers. She arrived as a tool. The scientists and conservationists who designed the Wilder Blean project were completely transparent about that. The bison were not the beneficiaries of this project. They were described in the official literature as the mechanism the woodland needed saving. Bison were identified as the best instrument available to save it. And yet, when the matriarch died, tributes poured in from across the world. That tension sits at the very heart of this story. An animal brought to a land it had not walked in for 6,000 years, treated as a conservation instrument, and yet somehow becoming something far more than that. By the time she died, the herd she built numbered 9 animals. The forest she had entered as a silent, sealed cathedral of dying trees had corridors of light punched through it. Beetles that had been declared extinct in the United Kingdom had reappeared. Grass snakes were multiplying, and 3 universities were still measuring exactly what she had done in a monitoring program that will not finish until 2050. That is the promise of this story, not a tidy ending. A living, ongoing experiment. And the matriarch started it by doing something no ranger had predicted on the very first day she stepped into that forest. The ghost forest no one could see was dying. To understand what the bison did, you first have to understand what was wrong with that forest. And this is where the story gets strange, because West Blean and Thorndon Woods did not look sick. Walk into it, and you would see exactly what an ancient woodland is supposed to look like. Tall trees, a thick canopy overhead, green in every direction. The phrase ancient woodland carries enormous weight in England. It suggests something precious, intact, and permanent. But ecologist Cora Kunzman, who leads the monitoring program for Kent Wildlife Trust, describes the reality beneath that impressive canopy as something entirely different. The forest floor was dark. The understory, meaning all the shrubs and flowering plants and grasses that should form a living layer between the ground and the tree canopy, had almost entirely vanished. Without that layer, specialist insects had no habitat. Without those insects, the birds and bats that depend on them were disappearing too. The forest looked healthy from the outside and was functionally dying from the inside. This had happened because of 2 consecutive failures spread across roughly a century. First, about half the woodland had been planted with Corsican pine during the 20th century, when the government encouraged fast-growing commercial timber. Pine plantations are dark, acidic, and hostile to the native species that ancient woodland should support. Then, in the other half of the forest, the traditional management technique of coppicing had simply stopped. Coppicing is the practice of cutting trees like sweet chestnut back to their stumps on a rotation of roughly 12 to 18 years. The stump, called a coppice stool, then regrows multiple new stems. The cutting creates bursts of open space where light floods the floor. Rare butterflies breed there. Nightingales nest in the young thicket that follows. But after the Second World War, the market for coppiced wood collapsed, and the labor disappeared with it. Nobody cut the stools anymore. The trees grew unchecked into a uniform canopy, and the floor beneath them fell into permanent shadow. Kent Wildlife Trust had been managing the site since 2003. They had cleared more than a third of the pine plantation. They had restarted coppicing in sections of the woodland, and none of it was keeping pace with the scale of the problem. Cut one section and light flooded in. Stopped for 3 years because of funding or weather or staffing, and the canopy sealed shut again. Managing 560 hectares with chainsaws and machinery required a budget and a workforce that simply did not exist. The woodland needed something that worked without a salary, without a review meeting, and without taking a single day off. And yet, hidden in the darkness, something extraordinary was clinging on. Before the bison arrived, baseline surveys recorded 178 species of spider, including a critically rare species not found anywhere in Britain since 2004. A fungus beetle not seen in the United Kingdom since 1988 was found in a single specimen. Nightingales were still singing. Lesser spotted woodpeckers, one of England's most rapidly declining birds, were still present. The European bison is not the American bison most people picture when they hear that word. It is built for forests, not open plains. Its ancestors shaped European woodland for hundreds of thousands of years. 12 animals, 7,000 years to sojourners, and one chance. Every ancient oak on this continent evolved in a landscape where bison were rubbing against bark, pushing over trees, and churning the earth with their bodies. When those animals disappeared, the forests they had shaped did not immediately collapse. But over centuries, something fundamental began to fail. The architecture of disturbance, the constant low-level chaos that creates habitat variety, was gone. In Britain, bison had been absent for approximately 6,000 years. But what happened to European bison across the rest of the continent in the 20th century is one of the most harrowing stories in conservation history. For centuries, Polish kings and Russian tsars had personally protected the bison of the Białowieża forest on the Poland and Belarus border. King Sigismund I made poaching bison a capital offense in 1518. That royal protection held for 400 years. By 1914, roughly 600 European bison still lived in Białowieża. Then German troops occupied the forest during the First World War. Over 2.5 years, soldiers slaughtered all 600 animals for sport, meat, hides, and horns. A German scientist warned the Army Command that the species was facing imminent extinction. The warning was ignored. As the troops retreated, they shot the last survivors. By 1921, the last wild bison in Poland was dead. The second population, in the Caucasus Mountains of Russia, had already been collapsing under poaching during the Russian Civil War. In 1927, the last 3 wild Caucasian bison were shot by poachers. The species was extinct in the wild. Every forest on the continent that had evolved with these animals was, suddenly and permanently, without them. A census taken in 1924 found 54 European bison with confirmed pedigrees scattered across European zoos. But a deeper analysis of their ancestry revealed something devastating. Many of these animals shared parents or grandparents. When scientists traced the true genetic lineage, the entire global population of European bison could be traced back to just 12 unique individuals, 5 males and 7 females. Today, over 12,000 European bison exist worldwide, with nearly 10,000 living free, and every single one of them carries the genetic signature of those 12 survivors. Researchers have calculated that one individual founder, a male called Plebejer, born in 1917 at a breeding center in Poland, contributes roughly 22.7% of all European bison genes alive on Earth today. He died in 1937, having never seen a wild forest. His descendants now walk in Kent, the hottest day in British history. Shortly before 7 in the morning on the 18th of July 2022, on what would become the hottest day ever recorded in the United Kingdom, with temperatures crossing 40 degrees Celsius, the gates of a corral in West Blean and Thorndon Woods swung open in front of the world's media. 3 female bison stepped out. The first was the matriarch, born on the 26th of May, 2004 at Highland Wildlife Park in Scotland. She was 18 years old. Paul Whitfield, director of Wildwood Trust and one of the project's architects, was in tears. He described watching her take those first steps out of the corral. She stopped. She looked directly at the crowd of journalists and cameras watching her. She assessed the situation. Then she gave some signal visible only to the other 2 females, and all 3 of them walked calmly into the forest and disappeared. The second female had only 1 horn. She had always been the lowest in the pecking order, but the most curious of the 3, always first to investigate anything unfamiliar. The third was bolder, more assertive, frequently nudging the 1-horned female aside when food was close. Within minutes of entering the woodland, all 3 animals were behaving in ways that no management plan had anticipated. The matriarch walked directly into a dense thicket of rhododendron, which is a highly invasive shrub species that smothers native woodland floor plants wherever it establishes. She circled her head in a figure of 8 motion and emerged from the thicket wearing what Ranger Donovan Wright described as a massive wig of rhododendron torn from the ground. No one had ever seen a European bison interact with rhododendron before. No one had predicted it. Rangers later concluded she may have been coating herself in the plant's essential oils as a natural insect repellent on a day of record-breaking heat. She may, in other words, have been self-medicating on her first hour in British soil. Within weeks, something stranger and more scientifically significant occurred. Wright received a phone call from the laboratory analyzing the matriarch's dung samples. The scientists on the other end asked almost tentatively whether bison were known to self-medicate. Wright went back through his observation notes and found that he and fellow ranger Tom Gibbs had both recorded the matriarch eating yew. Yew is toxic, but its toxins are also anti-parasitic. The matriarch had arrived with a significant parasite load visible in her early dung samples. After the yew-eating episodes, the parasite count dropped sharply. She had apparently used the forest itself as her own pharmacy, but the herd was still incomplete. The bull, born on the 18th of June 2018 at Saberburg Wildlife Park in Germany and carrying a direct genetic lineage to the 12 founding animals, was stuck in Europe. Post-Brexit import regulations, veterinary certifications, and transport paperwork had created months of delays. He would not arrive until December. While the world was watching for dramatic footage of enormous animals crashing through English woodland, the real transformation was happening quietly and precisely, driven by 4 specific behaviors working simultaneously. What bark and hooves actually do. Bark stripping is the first. Bison rub against living trees repeatedly, removing long vertical sections of bark in deep gouges. This eventually ring barks a tree, meaning the bark is removed all the way around the trunk, which kills it. A dead standing tree, called a snag, is among the most ecologically valuable structures that a woodland can contain. Roughly 2,000 species of beetle, bird, bat, and fungus depend on dead wood habitat at various stages of decay. Snags take decades to develop naturally. A bison creates one in a single season. Tree knockdown is the second. An adult male European bison can weigh close to 1 ton. By leaning and pushing against smaller trees, bison snap trunks and topple birch and willow, creating fallen deadwood on the forest floor and punching holes in the sealed canopy above. Light reaches the ground. In the season after knockdown, ground plants establish in those new gaps. Wallowing is the third, and it produces one of the most important but least visible effects. Bison roll on the ground to groom, to shed their heavy winter coat, and to regulate body temperature. This churning creates shallow, bare earth depressions across the woodland floor. In a forest where ground vegetation covers every centimeter of soil, bare earth is extraordinarily valuable. Hundreds of specialist insects, including rare bees and wasps that need exposed ground to nest, and plants that cannot germinate through dense leaf litter, depend on exactly these kinds of disturbances. Each wallow becomes a small ecological hotspot. Selective grazing is the fourth. Bison do not eat everything uniformly. They favor certain plant species and avoid others. This creates a mosaic of differently structured vegetation zones across the woodland floor. Short grazed patches next to tall herb communities next to untouched thickets. The kind of variety that supports maximum biological diversity across every layer of the woodland above. The combined result of these four behaviors operating continuously across hundreds of hectares is something that no human management program has ever replicated. It cannot be bought or scheduled. It has to be lived into existence by an animal that evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to produce exactly this outcome. And then came the dung beetles. Ranger Wright could not contain his astonishment. Within weeks of the bison arriving, dung beetle larvae appeared in the bison droppings. He said he would never know how the beetles got the memo that quickly. The answer almost certainly involves smell, carried on wind across hundreds of meters of ancient woodland, a biological signal that these insects had been waiting to receive for thousands of years. Fungi began growing from the bison dung almost as rapidly. The forest was responding to the return of something it had lost before human civilization built its first stone monument in Britain, a calf born in secret and a bull in the rain. On the 9th of September of 2022, just 8 weeks after the 3 females entered the woodland, female 2 slipped deep into the trees and gave birth to a female calf. Nobody knew she was pregnant. European bison conceal pregnancy as a survival mechanism evolved against predators, and the rangers had missed every sign. The calf was the first bison born in wild British woodland in thousands of years. News of the birth was held back for 2 weeks because Queen Elizabeth II had died the previous day and the country was in a 14-day mourning period. When the announcement finally came, rangers carefully avoided confirming or denying that they had nicknamed the calf Lizzie. In December 2022, in driving rain and freezing cold, the bull finally arrived from Germany. He refused to leave the warmth of his transport trailer. The rangers used a strategy that reveals something beautiful about bison behavior. They guided the 3 females up close to where the trailer was parked. The moment the bull caught their scent in the cold air, he was immediately on his feet. He stepped out, the 4 animals assessed each other briefly, and then together they walked back into the woodland. The herd was complete. By November 2023, the matriarch, who had previously experienced difficulties in pregnancy, gave birth to a male calf at 19 years old. He was the first bison conceived and born entirely on British soil in thousands of years. 2 more calves arrived in August 2024. 3 more followed in 2025. What had started as 3 animals on the hottest day in British history had become a self-sustaining breeding herd of 9. Not everyone celebrated. The controversy surrounding the Wilder-Blean project has never really been about bison. It has been about what bison represent in a country where every acre of land is owned, managed, and sits adjacent to human activity. The Dangerous Wild Animals Act of 1976 classifies European bison alongside tigers. This required 43 kilometers of double fencing around the bison zones and a site license from Canterbury City Council. It also meant that bison and the public could not share the same space at all. Since public footpaths crossed through the woodland, Kent Wildlife Trust had to build what became known as bison bridges, pedestrian overpasses allowing walkers to cross above, while bison moved freely below. 4 bridges were built at a combined cost of £1 million. The monitoring program will not deliver its full conclusions until 2050. By then, the oldest bison born at West Blean will be approaching 30 years old. The woodland around them will look nothing like it does today. It will look messier, more broken, more structurally complex, and, if the early data holds, incomparably more alive. So that is the full story of what 4 bison did to a dying English forest, and why it matters far beyond a single woodland in Kent. We would genuinely love to know what you think about rewilding, and whether you believe wild animals should have more space in modern Britain, so please share your thoughts in the comments below.